The sound was sharp, sudden, and wrong. A sickening thud. A gasp. Then silence. James looked up from his laptop, his fingers frozen on the keyboard. His mind took a moment to process the noise before his body reacted. The coffee mug beside him trembled slightly from the impact, the sound still echoing through the quiet house. Then, panic set in. He shot up from his chair, knocking it over as he rushed toward the living room. His socks slipped against the hardwood floors, but he barely noticed. His chest tightened with fear, his heartbeat hammering in his ears. As he rounded the corner, the sight before him made his stomach drop. His grandmother lay crumpled at the bottom of the stairs. "Grandma!" James's voice cracked as he sprinted toward her. She was on her side, her frail frame twisted unnaturally. The thin nightgown she wore was now stained with a deep red seeping from a gash on her forehead. Wisps of white hair clung to her pale skin. Her breathing was shallow, but she was alive. James dropped to his knees beside her, his hands hovering, afraid to touch her in case she was more injured than she appeared. His fingers shook as he reached for his phone, fumbling to dial emergency services. Come on," he muttered as the ringing tone seemed to last forever. Then, a sound. A whisper. James leaned in closer. "Grandma, can you hear me?" Her lips moved, barely forming words. He had to strain to catch what she was saying. "They pushed me." James's blood ran cold. His stomach clenched in confusion and fear. What did she mean? His eyes darted around the empty living room. The front door was locked. The windows were closed. The house was silent. "There's no one here, Grandma," he said, trying to keep his voice calm even though his insides were twisting. Her fingers weakly clutched at his wrist, her grip surprisingly strong for someone in her condition. Her lips trembled as she whispered again. "They don't want me to talk." James barely had time to process those words before her eyes fluttered shut, and she went limp in his arms. "No." His pulse pounded as he checked her breathing, still there, but faint. The phone line finally connected, and he barked his address into the receiver, demanding an ambulance immediately. His mind reeled as he stared at his unconscious grandmother. Had she fallen? Was she hallucinating? Or, was someone really here? James's hands balled into fists. He wasn't just scared. He was angry. Because if someone had hurt her, they were going to regret it. The hospital visit. The beeping of machines filled the hospital room. The sterile scent of antiseptic burned James's nostrils as he sat beside his grandmother's bed, watching the slow rise and fall of her chest. Doctors said she had suffered a mild concussion and some bruising but would recover. They assumed she had slipped and fallen, nothing more. A common accident for an elderly woman. But James wasn't convinced. She had been terrified. He had seen it in her eyes before she passed out. And those words, "They pushed me." He stared at her motionless form, frustration bubbling inside him. If she had imagined it, why had she looked so afraid? And if she hadn't, then who was in the house with them? Setting up the camera. Later that evening, after bringing her home from the hospital, James sat on the couch, his mind racing. He glanced toward the staircase, picturing the moment he had found her at the bottom. Something wasn't right. He had spent his entire life in this house. His grandmother had lived there for over 40 years. She knew every creaky floorboard, every uneven step. Even in the dark, she wouldn't have just fallen. And yet, the doctors said there were no signs of struggle. No evidence of forced entry. Nothing to suggest foul play. But James knew what he had heard. They pushed me. Someone, or something, was in that house. And he was going to prove it. James pulled out an old security camera from a box in the storage room. He had bought it years ago but never used it. He set it up discreetly on a bookshelf in the living room, angling it toward the staircase and the surrounding area. If anything moved, the camera would catch it. If someone was in the house, he would know. He checked the feed on his phone. The video quality wasn't perfect, but it was good enough. Satisfied, he set his phone on the coffee table, took a deep breath, and waited. His grandmother was sleeping upstairs, still weak from the fall. The house was silent except for the occasional creak of the old wooden floors. Midnight came and went. Nothing. 1 a.m. Still nothing. James fought to keep his eyes open. The soft hum of the refrigerator, the distant ticking of the grandfather clock, it was lulling him into drowsiness. He glanced at his phone screen one last time before letting his eyes close. Then, at exactly 3:14 a.m., the camera feed flickered. The static lasted only a second before the image returned. And James saw it. A shadow. At the top of the stairs. James's breath hitched. His tiredness vanished in an instant. He sat up straight, gripping his phone so tightly his knuckles turned white. The shadow was human-shaped but featureless. It didn't move like a normal person. It stood there, almost too still. The dim glow from the hallway nightlight cast an eerie outline around it. Then, slowly, it turned its head. And looked straight into the camera. James's blood turned to ice. This wasn't just a trick of the light. This wasn't his imagination. Something was in the house. And it knew it was being watched. His stomach twisted into knots as the shadow began to move. Not walking. Gliding. Down the stairs. Toward the living room. Toward him. James barely had time to react before the camera feed cut to static. His phone screen went dark. A cold shiver crawled up his spine as he realized. He wasn't alone. James's fingers hovered over his phone screen, his pulse hammering in his ears. The camera feed had gone dark. One moment, the eerie figure had been at the top of the stairs, staring into the camera. The next, static. He swallowed hard, his throat dry. His mind raced with possibilities, each one worse than the last. His body tensed, every muscle coiled as he listened for any sound in the house. Silence. Too much silence. The kind that makes your skin crawl. James forced himself to move. He grabbed the baseball bat he kept beside the couch and rose to his feet, his breathing shallow. His fingers gripped the handle so tightly his knuckles turned white. His heart pounded. Step by step, he crept toward the staircase. The old wooden floor beneath his feet groaned softly, the sound unnaturally loud in the stillness of the house. He reached the bottom of the stairs and hesitated, staring up into the darkness above. The nightlight still flickered in the hallway, casting long shadows. No movement. No sound. But he knew something had been there. And it might still be. His grandmother was asleep upstairs. He needed to check on her. Summoning every ounce of courage, he took a deep breath and ascended the staircase, bat raised and ready. Each step felt like an eternity, his ears straining for the slightest noise. When he reached the top, he paused. His grandmother's door was slightly ajar. A chill crept up his spine. He had closed that door earlier. He was sure of it. James pushed the door open slowly, wincing as it creaked. The dim glow from the bedside lamp cast a soft light over the room. His grandmother lay in bed, her frail chest rising and falling in steady breaths. Nothing seemed out of place. Relief washed over him, but only for a second. Then. A whisper. From behind him. James spun around so fast he nearly lost his balance. His breath caught in his throat. The hallway was empty. Or at least, it looked empty. But the air felt different. Thicker. Charged. Like something unseen was watching. Waiting. James backed into the room and shut the door, locking it behind him. His hands trembled as he checked on his grandmother once more. She stirred slightly but didn't wake. He sat on the edge of her bed, his mind racing. He needed answers. Reviewing the footage. Morning came far too slowly. James hadn't slept. He stayed in the room with his grandmother until the first light of dawn broke through the windows. Only then did he muster the courage to leave the room. With hesitant steps, he made his way downstairs. The house looked normal again, as if the night before had just been a bad dream. But he knew better. He grabbed his phone and rushed to the couch, opening the camera app. His hands were still unsteady as he scrolled to the recorded footage. He took a deep breath. Then, he pressed play. The first few minutes showed nothing unusual. Just the empty living room, the staircase, the quiet of the house at night. Then, at 3:14 a.m., the footage flickered. And the figure appeared. James's stomach churned. It stood at the top of the stairs. A dark silhouette. Featureless, yet disturbingly aware of the camera. Then it did something that made James's blood run ice cold. It grinned. Not with a mouth, because the figure had no discernible face. But James felt it. A slow, deliberate grin. A knowing grin. Then, as if it knew James was watching, the figure took a step forward. Then another. It descended the stairs. With every step, the lights in the hallway flickered. Shadows twisted unnaturally, stretching toward the camera like reaching hands. James's fingers tightened around his phone. He forced himself to keep watching. The figure reached the bottom step. It turned its head toward the living room. Toward him. James's breath hitched. Then. The camera glitched. The screen warped, the colors bleeding together in an unnatural distortion. For a moment, James thought the footage was completely corrupted. But then. It was there. In the living room. Standing just feet away from the camera. James's stomach twisted into knots. How? The figure had crossed the room in an instant. It hadn't walked. It had just appeared. Then, in the final second before the screen cut to static, the figure lurched forward. Straight into the camera. James nearly dropped his phone. His breath came in short gasps. His pulse thundered in his ears. What the hell had he just watched? A chilling revelation. James slammed his phone down, his hands shaking. He ran a hand through his hair, trying to steady his thoughts. That thing, it had been in the house. It was still in the house. He sucked in a sharp breath, forcing himself to think. He needed to get his grandmother out of here. Now. James bolted up the stairs, his heart racing. He reached her room and shook her gently. "Grandma, wake up. We have to go." She stirred, her eyelids fluttering open. She looked at him with confusion. "James? What's wrong?" "I don't have time to explain," he said, his voice urgent. "We need to leave. Now." But instead of panicking, his grandmother sighed. As if she had been expecting this. She slowly sat up, her tired eyes locking onto his. "James," her voice was soft. "It won't let us leave." James's stomach dropped. "What do you mean?" His voice was barely above a whisper. Her frail hand reached for his. "It's been here for a long time." James's throat tightened. He struggled to find words. What do you mean, a long time?" "Grandma, what is it?" She exhaled, looking toward the dark corner of the room. "The house was never empty, James," she whispered. "We've just been ignoring it." A deep creak echoed from the hallway. James's blood turned to ice. Something was outside the door. And it was listening. The creak outside the door sent a shiver down James's spine. He exchanged a glance with his grandmother, whose face was eerily calm, as if she had long accepted whatever was lurking beyond that door. James, on the other hand, felt his heart hammering in his chest. His instincts screamed at him to run, but his feet remained planted on the wooden floor, frozen in fear. The silence stretched, thick and suffocating. Then, another creak. Closer this time. James swallowed hard. He gripped the baseball bat tighter, his sweaty palms making it slippery. He took a slow, cautious step toward the door. His grandmother's frail voice stopped him. "James," she whispered, her voice laced with warning. "Don't open it." He turned to her, his pulse pounding in his ears. "Grandma, we can't just sit here. If there's someone in the house, we have to do something." Her eyes darkened. "It's not someone." James clenched his jaw. "Then what is it?" His grandmother exhaled shakily, her hands trembling as she clutched the blanket over her lap. "I told you. It's been here for a long time." James's mind reeled. He wanted to demand answers, to force her to explain what she meant. But before he could speak, the door handle twisted. A slow, deliberate turn. James's breath caught in his throat. He raised the bat, his body tense. Then, silence. The handle stopped moving. The air in the room grew heavy, thick with something unseen. And then, a whisper. Low. Inhuman. Right outside the door. "James." His grip on the bat faltered. His stomach twisted into knots. He had never felt this kind of fear before. Not when he found his grandmother at the bottom of the stairs, not when he had seen the shadow on the camera. This was different. Personal. He wasn't just being watched. He was being hunted. Then, suddenly, 3 sharp knocks. James jumped back. His grandmother grabbed his wrist, her fingers surprisingly strong. "James," she hissed. "You must not open that door." His heart pounded so hard he thought it might burst out of his chest. He could barely think straight. But he listened. Seconds passed. The knocks didn't come again. Then, just as suddenly as it had started, it stopped. The air lightened. The unnatural tension lifted. James hesitated before stepping forward and pressing his ear to the wood. Nothing. But he wasn't convinced. Slowly, cautiously, he reached for the door handle and jerked it open. The hallway was empty. No shadowy figure. No movement. Just the dim glow of the nightlight flickering at the end of the hall. James stepped out, gripping the bat tightly. He scanned the corridor, his pulse still racing. His grandmother remained in bed, watching him with wary eyes. A long, cold breath escaped his lips. Was it gone? The hidden journal. James barely slept that night. He remained in his grandmother's room, sitting against the door with the bat in his hands. He kept his ears sharp, listening for any unusual noises. But the rest of the night was eerily quiet. By morning, exhaustion weighed on his shoulders, but his mind remained sharp. He needed answers. His grandmother had tried to brush off the entity's presence, but James wasn't letting it slide. If something had been in their house for years, why hadn't she told him before? Why was she acting as if this was normal? Once she woke up, he confronted her. "Grandma, I need you to tell me the truth," he said firmly. "What the hell is going on in this house?" She looked away, her frail hands fidgeting with the blanket. For a moment, James thought she might refuse. But then, with a heavy sigh, she nodded. "There's something I need to show you," she murmured. James followed her as she slowly led him to her bedroom closet. She hesitated, then reached up to the top shelf, pulling down an old, dusty journal. She handed it to him. "This belonged to your grandfather." James frowned. Grandpa? He had never met his grandfather. The man had died before he was born, and his grandmother rarely spoke about him. James flipped open the journal. The pages were yellowed, the ink faded, but the words were still legible. He started reading. And with every word, his blood ran colder. The truth in the pages. April 17, 1975. The whispers are getting worse. At first, I thought they were just in my head. But last night, I heard my name. Right outside the bedroom door. April 30, 1975. Mary thinks I'm losing my mind. She doesn't hear them. But I do. I see the shadows in the hallway. They don't move like normal shadows. They watch. May 10, 1975. It's not just the whispers anymore. Last night, I saw it. Standing at the foot of our bed. It had no face. Just a presence. A darkness that doesn't belong. May 20, 1975. I tried to leave. I packed my bags. But the front door, it wouldn't open. No matter how hard I pulled, it was like something was holding it shut. I know now that we're trapped. June 5, 1975. I don't think it wants to hurt us. Not yet. It just doesn't want us to know too much. James's hands trembled as he turned the pages. The last entry sent a chill down his spine. June 30, 1975. I made a mistake. I set up a camera. I wanted proof. I needed to see it for myself. It saw me watching. It didn't like that. Now, it's angry. Now, I hear it breathing right behind me. That was the final entry. James stared at the page, his heart thudding like a war drum. The pieces were coming together. His grandfather had seen it. Just like James had. And when he set up a camera, it fought back. Just like it had done to James. He exhaled shakily, closing the journal. His grandmother sat on the edge of the bed, her gaze distant. You knew, James said softly. You knew all this time. Tears welled up in her tired eyes. I thought if we ignored it, if we didn't talk about it, it would leave us alone. James shook his head, frustration bubbling inside him. But it didn't. It's still here, Grandma. She wiped at her eyes. I know. A heavy silence hung between them. James felt his resolve harden. He wasn't going to live in fear. He wasn't going to pretend it wasn't real. If this thing had haunted his family for decades, it was time to end it. Once and for all. A dangerous plan. That night, James made a decision. If this entity didn't want to be seen, if it got angry when it was watched, then that was exactly what James was going to do. He set up 3 cameras this time. One in the hallway. One in the living room. And one outside his grandmother's bedroom door. He wasn't going to run. He wasn't going to hide. He was going to face it. And whatever happened next, he would be ready. But as he lay in bed that night, staring at his phone screen with the live feed of the cameras, the hallway camera glitched. And the last thing James saw before the screen cut to static was the figure standing right outside his bedroom door. James's breath hitched. The camera feed had frozen, but the last frame was burned into his mind, a tall, shadowy figure standing right outside his bedroom door. His fingers trembled as he tapped his phone screen, trying to refresh the footage. The app lagged. Static. James's throat went dry. A sound broke the silence, a soft, deliberate creak. The wooden floorboards outside his door. James's heartbeat thundered in his ears. He swallowed hard, forcing himself to think. Stay calm. Breathe. He tightened his grip on the baseball bat beside him. He wasn't going to let fear control him. Not this time. Taking a deep breath, he reached for the lamp on his nightstand. The moment he turned it on, the creaking stopped. Silence. The air felt heavy, charged with something unseen. Then, the hallway camera flickered back on. James's eyes darted to the screen. The figure was gone. His stomach twisted into knots. Where did it go? Was it still in the house? A noise from the other room made his blood run cold. His grandmother's room. James shot out of bed, gripping the bat tight as he rushed to her door. He twisted the knob and pushed it open. The room was dimly lit by the soft glow of the bedside lamp. His grandmother was sitting upright, staring at him with wide, unblinking eyes. "Grandma," he whispered. Her lips parted slightly, but she said nothing. James stepped closer. "Did you hear something?" Slowly, she raised a shaking hand. And pointed behind him. A wave of ice washed over James's body. He turned his head. Nothing. The hallway was empty. He exhaled shakily, his muscles tense. "I swear, Grandma, I saw something on the camera." She nodded slowly, her voice barely above a whisper. "It doesn't like being seen." James clenched his jaw. He was getting tired of feeling powerless. "It's time to end this," he muttered. His grandmother's eyes filled with fear. "James, don't." But he was already heading back to his room. If this thing didn't want to be seen, then he was going to force it into the light. Uncovering the truth. The next morning, James reviewed the footage. He fast-forwarded through hours of video, watching for any movement, any sign of the entity. And then, there it was. At 3:14 a.m., the hallway camera captured something impossible. The figure didn't walk into frame. It appeared 1 second, the hallway was empty. The next, the tall, shadowy form was standing there. James's breath caught in his throat. He watched as it moved toward his bedroom door. And then, it did something that made his skin crawl. It turned its head. Not toward the door. Toward the camera. As if it knew it was being watched. Then, just before the feed cut to static, the entity did something even worse. It smiled. A wide, unnatural grin stretching across the darkness of its face. James slammed his laptop shut, his hands shaking. This wasn't just a ghost. It was something far more sinister. A forgotten secret. James needed answers. His grandmother clearly knew more than she was letting on. If his grandfather had documented this in his journal, maybe there was more hidden somewhere in the house. He started searching. In the attic, he found boxes of old belongings. Faded photographs, letters, dusty trinkets from the past. Then, tucked away in a wooden chest, he found a second journal. This one wasn't his grandfather's. It belonged to his grandmother. James flipped through the pages, his eyes widening at what he read. She had known. She had seen it too. But there was more. A name. The journal referred to the entity as the Watcher. James's skin prickled as he read the chilling words his grandmother had written decades ago. The Watcher does not harm. It waits. It watches. It chooses. It chose him first. And now, it has chosen James. James's hands tightened around the journal. This thing wasn't just haunting them. It had marked them. A desperate plan. James confronted his grandmother, placing the journal in front of her. "What does this mean?" he demanded. She stared at the book, her face pale. "Grandma," he pressed. "You knew about this all along. You knew it was watching me." Tears welled up in her eyes. "I thought if we ignored it, it would go away." James ran a frustrated hand through his hair. "It's not going away. It's getting stronger." His grandmother hesitated, then took a deep breath. "There's only one way to stop it," she whispered. James leaned in. "How?" She met his gaze, her expression haunted. "You have to face it." His stomach twisted. "What do you mean?" She exhaled shakily. "You have to acknowledge it. Look at it. Speak to it. It won't disappear until you break the cycle." James felt a chill run down his spine. Every instinct screamed at him that this was a terrible idea. But he had no choice. If he didn't stop the Watcher, it would never leave them alone. That night, James prepared himself. He set up the cameras again. He turned off every light in the house. And he sat in his room. Waiting. Listening. At 3:14 a.m., the hallway camera flickered. James's phone screen showed the same horrifying sight, the Watcher standing outside his door. His fingers trembled, but he forced himself to move. Slowly, he reached for the door handle. And opened it. The hallway was dark. Empty. But James knew it was there. His breath was shallow. His hands clammy. And then, he spoke. "I see you." A rush of cold air swept past him. The lights in the house flickered violently. A deep, guttural whisper echoed through the hallway. "You were never meant to look." James's vision blurred. He felt an overwhelming force pressing down on him, suffocating him. But he didn't back down. He took a step forward. "I know what you are," he said, his voice steady despite the fear clawing at his throat. "You don't control me." The air around him shifted. The darkness in the hallway twisted. And then, the figure stepped into the light. James's blood turned to ice. He was looking at himself. A distorted version of him. Darker. Hollow. A twisted grin stretched across its face. It tilted its head. "You are not ready." James's breath hitched. And then, it lunged. James had no time to react. The dark figure, his own twisted reflection, lunged at him with unnatural speed. A freezing force wrapped around him, like invisible hands squeezing his throat. He gasped, struggling to breathe, his body paralyzed. It wasn't just touching him. It was inside him. James's mind felt like it was being ripped apart. A flood of memories, emotions, and visions that were not his own crashed into him. He saw his grandfather, standing in the same hallway decades ago, eyes wide with terror. He saw his grandmother, younger, trembling as she whispered the same words he had just spoken, "I see you." He saw something worse. A forest, ancient and endless. A house, hidden deep within the trees. A door, chained shut, with something pounding from the inside. And then, the most terrifying vision of all. Himself. Older. Worn down. Eyes filled with despair. Sitting in this same house. Alone. Watching. James snapped back to reality, gasping for air. The figure was gone. The hallway was empty. But he could still feel it. Inside him. It hadn't disappeared. It had left something behind. A voice in the dark. James staggered backward, heart hammering, his legs felt weak as he stumbled into his room, slamming the door shut. He pressed his back against it, trying to catch his breath. The house was silent. But inside his head. A voice whispered. "You should not have looked." James shivered. It wasn't his voice. It was the Watcher. He grabbed his phone and checked the security footage. Nothing. The hallway was empty. His room was still. His grandmother's door remained shut. But James knew better. It was still here. Watching. Waiting. For what? Grandma's confession. James couldn't stay in that room any longer. He grabbed his jacket and rushed down the hall to his grandmother's room. He hesitated for a second, then pushed the door open. She was awake, sitting up in bed, her hands folded in her lap. As if she had been expecting him. "You saw it," she said softly. James nodded, his throat dry. It wasn't just a shadow, Grandma. It was, me." His grandmother's expression darkened. She took a deep breath and motioned for him to sit beside her. James hesitated before lowering himself onto the chair next to the bed. "I should have told you sooner," she whispered. "But I was afraid." James clenched his fists. "Afraid of what?" She looked at him, eyes full of sorrow. "That it would choose you." James's stomach dropped. "What do you mean?" She exhaled shakily. "The Watcher doesn't just haunt this house. It haunts our bloodline." James felt a cold wave of dread wash over him. "Our family has always been tied to it," she continued. "Your grandfather, your great-grandfather, and now you." James swallowed hard. "But why?" His grandmother looked away. "Because one of us made a deal. A long time ago." James's chest tightened. "A deal?" She nodded. "Your great-grandfather. He found something in the woods, a place he was never meant to see. He made a deal to gain knowledge. Power. But he didn't realize the cost." James leaned forward. "What cost?" Her lips trembled. "The Watcher doesn't take souls, James. It takes time." James froze. "What does that mean?" She met his gaze. "It waits. It watches. And then, it takes years from your life." James's blood ran cold. "Your grandfather, he didn't die from illness. He died because the Watcher took him." James stared at her in horror. And then, she said something even worse. "It's your turn now. The truth about the Watcher." James's mind raced. This wasn't just a haunting, it was a curse. And it wasn't going to stop. Unless he broke the cycle. He stood up. "Tell me how to stop it." His grandmother shook her head. "No one has ever stopped it." James clenched his jaw. "Then I'll be the first." He turned toward the door. Her voice stopped him. "James, be careful." He didn't answer. He had no choice but to face the Watcher. Into the woods. James spent the next few hours preparing. If his great-grandfather had found something in the woods, then that's where James needed to go. At midnight, he grabbed a flashlight, a camera, and his grandfather's journal. Then, he walked into the trees. The forest was silent. Not even the wind stirred. James's flashlight flickered, and he felt the air shift around him. The deeper he walked, the heavier the atmosphere became. And then, he saw it. The house from his vision. It was real. The wooden structure was old, broken, covered in vines. But James could still see the chains wrapped around the door. Something was inside. James's heart pounded. He took a cautious step forward. And then, from the darkness, a voice whispered. "You were not meant to find this place." James spun around. And froze. Standing just a few feet away, watching him, was the Watcher. His own reflection. Distorted. Hollow. And smiling. A dangerous choice. James's mind screamed at him to run, but he forced himself to stand his ground. He lifted his flashlight. "What do you want from me?" The Watcher tilted its head. "Your time." James clenched his jaw. "No." The Watcher's grin widened. "Then we trade." James's breath caught. "Trade?" The Watcher lifted a hand and pointed at the house. "Open the door. Set it free. And I will leave you be." James's stomach twisted. It was lying. Whatever was inside that house wasn't meant to be released. And James had a feeling that if he opened that door, he wouldn't survive. But if he didn't, the Watcher would keep taking from him. Stealing his time. His future. James had to make a choice. His fingers trembled as he reached into his pocket, gripping his grandfather's journal. Inside, there had to be an answer. Some way to end this. He took a deep breath and made his decision. And as he stepped forward, the Watcher's grin faded. It whispered, "Wrong choice." Then, the forest exploded into darkness. James felt himself falling. And everything went black. James's world shattered into darkness. For a moment, he felt nothing, no sound, no air, no ground beneath his feet. Then, suddenly, he was falling. The cold wind whipped against his skin, and his stomach lurched as he plunged downward into an abyss. His arms flailed, trying to grab onto something, anything, but there was only darkness. His flashlight was gone. His camera, gone. Even the forest had vanished. It was just him, tumbling into an endless void. Then, impact. James hit the ground with a bone-jarring force, knocking the air from his lungs. His body screamed in pain, his limbs aching from the fall. He groaned, rolling onto his side, gasping for breath. The ground beneath him was cold and hard, not dirt, not grass. Stone. He blinked rapidly, trying to adjust his eyes to the dark. Where was he? The last thing he remembered was the Watcher, the chained house in the woods, the choice. He had refused. And now, he was somewhere else. Somewhere the Watcher had sent him. The Whispering Chamber. James forced himself to sit up, wincing as pain throbbed through his ribs. A dim, flickering light came from somewhere ahead. He turned his head, and what he saw made his blood run cold. He was in a cavern. Not a natural one, this place looked ancient, like something carved deep beneath the earth centuries ago. The walls were rough stone, covered in strange symbols that seemed to shift when he looked at them. And then, the whispers began. James froze. The air around him moved as if something unseen was circling him. The whispers weren't loud, they were soft, almost gentle. But the words. You should not have refused. You belong to us now. The trade was your only chance. James clenched his jaw, forcing himself to stand. His head spun, but he ignored it. He needed to move. If the Watcher had sent him here, then there had to be a way out. He turned toward the flickering light. It was coming from a narrow passage ahead, leading deeper into the cavern. James hesitated. Every instinct screamed at him to turn back, but back to where? There was nothing behind him except endless blackness. He had no choice. With a deep breath, he stepped forward. The figures in the dark. The whispers grew louder as James moved deeper into the passage. They weren't coming from one place, they were coming from everywhere. He wasn't alone down here. He could feel them. Watching. Waiting. James kept his steps slow, his hands clenched into fists. The passage widened into a vast underground chamber. And that's when he saw them. The figures. Dozens of them. Standing in the shadows, barely visible. Not moving. Not breathing. Just watching him. James's breath hitched. His skin crawled. They weren't just people. Some were wrong. Some were too tall, their limbs twisted at unnatural angles. Some had hollow eyes, their faces frozen in silent screams. And one was his grandfather. James's heart nearly stopped. His grandfather stood among them, his expression blank, his body still. It wasn't possible. He had seen him die. He had buried him. Yet here he was. James took a step forward. "Grandpa?" The figure tilted its head. James's throat went dry. The whispering voices merged into one. "Join us." James stumbled back. The figures moved, "Run or die." The moment James stepped away, the whispering turned into a roar. The figures rushed toward him. James spun on his heel and ran. The cavern shook, the ground trembling beneath his feet. The air grew thick, heavy, pressing against his lungs. The passage was closing in. A deep, guttural sound echoed from behind him, something inhuman. James didn't dare look back. He pushed forward, his legs screaming in protest, his heartbeat a drum pounding in his ears. Ahead. A light. Brighter than before. A way out. James threw himself toward it just as something cold grazed the back of his neck. A hand, grasping. He lunged forward. And burst through. The return. James fell. But this time, he didn't land on stone. He landed on grass, warm air rushed over his skin. The scent of earth filled his nose. He was back in the forest. James gasped, scrambling to his feet. His chest heaved. He turned in a frantic circle. The cavern was gone. The figures, gone. The only thing left was the chained house. Exactly where he had left it. James staggered forward, barely able to process what had just happened. But one thing was clear. The Watcher had let him go. Or so he thought. As he turned toward the house, something caught his eye. His hands. They were older. His fingers, wrinkled. His skin, weathered. James's breath caught. He turned to the reflection in the broken window of the house. The face staring back at him was not the one he remembered. He had been gone for years. James stared at his reflection in horror. The face in the broken window wasn't the one he remembered. His jawline was sharper, but his skin had aged. Wrinkles lined his forehead. His hair, once dark, now had streaks of gray. His hands, veins more pronounced, fingers slightly thinner. This wasn't possible. He had only been gone for a few hours. Hadn't he? His heart pounded as he touched his face, his hands trembling. How long had he been down there? How much time had the Watcher taken? A sudden wind howled through the trees, chilling him to the bone. The house loomed before him, the chains on the door rattling softly, as if something inside was stirring. James took a shaky step back. He needed to go home. He needed to know what had changed. His grandmother, was she still alive? What year was it? What if everyone he knew was gone? Panic gripped his chest. Then, in the wind, a whisper slithered into his ears. "Welcome back, James." Home, but not home. James sprinted through the forest, ignoring the aching in his legs, the weight in his chest. The trees looked the same, but something about the air felt off. When he finally reached the edge of the property, he nearly collapsed from relief. The house, his house, was still standing. But the porch light was different. It was a newer model. The mailbox had rust on it, which hadn't been there before. The plants his grandmother used to tend were overgrown and wild. James hesitated before stepping onto the porch. His breathing was shallow, his heart hammering in his chest. His hand reached for the doorknob. Locked. A jolt of dread shot through him. He never locked the door. He knocked. No answer. James swallowed hard and knocked again, louder this time. Still, nothing. Then, from inside, came the sound of footsteps. Slow. Hesitant. The door creaked open, just a crack. And behind it, staring at him with wide, terrified eyes, was a man James had never seen before. James's stomach dropped. This was his house. But someone else was living in it, the stranger in the doorway. The man was in his mid-40s, wearing a flannel shirt, his face rugged but wary. James opened his mouth, his throat dry. "Who are you?" The man's eyes narrowed. "I could ask you the same thing." James frowned. This is my house." The man let out a short, nervous laugh. "I don't think so, buddy." James's patience snapped. "I've lived here my whole life. Where's my grandmother?" The man's expression shifted, from confusion to something else. Sadness. "Who are you looking for?" the man asked. James's pulse thundered. "Margaret. Margaret Hale. My grandmother." The man's face paled. A horrible, suffocating silence filled the air. And then, softly, "Margaret Hale died 5 years ago." James felt the ground tilt beneath him. His knees almost buckled. "No. That wasn't possible." His voice came out hoarse. "That's not." His hands shook as he gripped the doorframe. 5 years? He had only been gone for a night. The Watcher had taken 5 years from him. A world that moved on. James stumbled back, his breath coming in sharp gasps. The man looked at him with cautious sympathy. "I don't know who you are," he said, "but you're scaring my wife and kid." James barely registered the words. He turned, his vision blurred, and staggered down the steps. He had to see for himself. He ran to the backyard. The garden was dead. The old swing set where he and his brother used to play was broken, rusted. The window to his old bedroom was dark. It was real. The world had kept moving without him. He was a ghost in his own life. Proof of the past. James needed answers. There was only one place to go. The cemetery. His grandmother had always told him where she wanted to be buried, next to his grandfather. James walked the entire way, his mind numb. When he reached the cemetery, his legs felt like lead. His eyes scanned the headstones until... there it was. Margaret Hale. 1939 to 2019. James stared. His chest ached, a hollow, gaping wound in his soul. He had missed it. He hadn't been there. Tears blurred his vision. Then, his eyes locked onto the grave beside hers, and his heart nearly stopped. James Hale. 1989 to 2018. His own name. His own grave. A dead man walking. James's breath came in ragged gasps. No. No, no, no. This had to be a mistake. His name, his date of birth. It said he had died in 2018. Which meant he had been missing for 5 years. Not just missing. Presumed dead. A wave of nausea hit him. He was a dead man. And yet, here he stood. How was this possible? He took a shaky step back. And then... a soft click. The sound of a camera. James's blood turned to ice. He whirled around. A man stood at the edge of the cemetery holding a camera. Taking pictures of him. The stranger lowered the camera slowly. His face was shadowed by the dim light, but James could make out one detail. His eyes. They were too familiar. Too much like James's own. The Watcher. James's heart slammed against his ribs. His pulse roared in his ears. The Watcher was still here. And it had let him come back for a reason. The man gave a slow, knowing smile. Then, without a word, he turned and walked away. James stayed frozen, unable to move, unable to breathe. Because he knew. This wasn't over. Not even close. Isn't finished yet. Part 8, The Final Price. James stood frozen in the cemetery, his heartbeat hammering in his ears. His own grave was right in front of him. The chiseled letters stared back, cold and final. James Hale. 1989 to 2018. According to the world, he was dead. And standing at the edge of the cemetery was the watcher. The man with the camera, the same figure James had seen in the woods, the same presence that had haunted his every step. The watcher had taken 5 years from him. And now, he was back. James took a slow, unsteady step forward. "What do you want from me?" The watcher tilted his head, the faintest smile curving his lips. "You already know." A sharp wind rustled the trees, sending a chill through James's bones. He clenched his fists. "No. No more riddles. No more games. Tell me why I'm here. Tell me what you did to me." The watcher took a step closer. "You broke the rules, James." His voice was calm, too calm. James's jaw tightened. "What rules?" The watcher's smile faded. "You weren't supposed to leave." A cold wave of dread settled over James. "What do you mean?" The watcher gestured toward the grave. "You died, James. The world has already moved on. You were never meant to return." James's chest tightened. "So, what?" he snapped. "I just disappear again? Let my life stay buried under a lie?" "No. I refuse." The watcher studied him for a long moment, then sighed. "That's exactly the problem. The truth unfolds." The air grew heavier. The world around James seemed to shift, the trees swayed unnaturally, the gravestones blurred at the edges. And then, everything went silent. No wind. No distant hum of traffic. James swallowed. The watcher lifted his camera, tapping the lens. "Do you know what this really is?" James stared at it, his pulse racing. "A camera?" The watcher smirked. "No. It's a door." James's hands curled into fists. "A door to what?" The watcher turned the camera around, revealing the screen. And what James saw made his blood run cold. It was him. But not now. It was James 5 years ago, standing in the woods, just before he had entered the chained house. The screen flickered, and suddenly, James was watching his past self disappear. The moment he had been taken. His stomach twisted. "What the hell is this?" The watcher lowered the camera. "Time doesn't work the way you think it does, James. You weren't just missing. You were removed." James's breath came in short gasps. "You mean I was erased?" The watcher nodded. "In a way, yes. You were meant to stay in the other place. But you forced your way back. And now, the world doesn't know what to do with you." James's head spun. "You're lying. That's not possible." The watcher simply held up the camera. The screen flickered again, showing his grandmother's funeral. James's knees nearly buckled. The faces of his family, standing around the grave. The grief in their eyes. And then, his own face in the background. James gasped. There he was, watching his own funeral. His hands trembled. No. No, that didn't happen. The watcher's voice was quiet. You don't remember because you weren't really there. But I saw you. You tried to come back before. James's chest ached. I don't understand. The watcher finally stepped closer, his voice barely above a whisper. You were given a choice, James. 5 years ago. And you chose wrong. The final choice. James's mind raced. What choice? The Watcher exhaled. You don't remember, do you? The wind howled. And suddenly, the world around James shifted. The cemetery vanished. He was back. Back in the chained house. James stumbled backward, his breath catching in his throat. The rotten wood beneath his feet. The chains clinking in the still air. And there, in the shadows of the room, was his past self. James stood frozen as he watched the scene unfold. His past self sat in the center of the dark room, staring at something. A figure. Tall. Cloaked in black. The Watcher. The voice echoed. You must choose. James's past self looked terrified. The Watcher continued. One path allows you to stay. To remain in the world as you are. The other, you leave, but time takes its price. James's head spun. He had been here before. He had chosen. But he didn't remember what. His past self shook his head violently. I don't want either. The Watcher tilted his head. Then time will decide for you. James's past self suddenly screamed. The room collapsed into darkness. The consequence, James gasped as he snapped back to the present. The cemetery returned, the cold air slicing through him. His body trembled. He had refused to choose. That was why the Watcher had taken him. That was why he had disappeared for 5 years. James clenched his fists. If I choose now, can I fix this? The Watcher studied him for a long time. Then, finally. You can return. But something must take your place. James's breath hitched. The Watcher held up the camera. The door must remain open for someone else. James's stomach dropped. Someone else had to disappear. James's mind reeled. Was he really about to doom another person just to reclaim his life? Was he willing to make someone else suffer as he had? The Watcher's voice was soft. Choose, James. James's heartbeat pounded. His life. His grandmother. His past. All gone. And now. He had a chance to take it back. But at what cost? He took a shaky breath. And made his choice. The aftermath. James blinked. And suddenly. He was back. The sun was shining. Birds chirped in the trees. The cemetery was gone. The Watcher was gone. And he was standing in front of his house. Everything looked normal. But James knew, it wasn't. He turned toward the street. And his blood ran cold. A missing persons flyer was taped to a streetlight. James's breath caught. It wasn't his name on the paper. It was someone else's. Someone had taken his place. James's hands shook. Had he really just done that? Had he really traded another soul for his own? A cold breeze brushed against his neck. And in the distance, he swore he heard the faintest click of a camera shutter. The Watcher was still watching. James had escaped. But the game wasn't over. Not for whoever had taken his place. And deep down, James knew. One day, the Watcher would come back for him.